All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another CTAS clinic. This particular education clinic is going to be on exercise physiology. Now, a lot of the clinics that we've had so far and the educational aspects that we've had so far have been on some form of science or another, right? When we're covering nutrition, we're talking about different forms of biology. When we're talking about program design and actually doing the physical exercise, we're getting into a lot of the kinesiology. In this class, we're going to delve into some of the biological components. So things that we talk about in discussion in each of these other classes, but more of the why we're doing what we're doing. So this is going to both supplement some of the other classes that we've had, as well as to aid in some of the program design we need to be doing in our units and our conversations that we have with our soldiers, right? We're well aware that most of our soldiers ask the why question now, which is good. It's kind of a counter to what it was when we first came in, but with a lot of leadership styles now trying to get soldiers to understand critical thinking and to understand how to adapt, that why question is vital. It's very important. And so, as with all of our blocks of instruction, if you have any questions, whether that is in person for those of you that are here or those of you that are joining through Teams, please just interrupt, let me know, and I will stop, have that conversation, because any question you have, I guarantee someone else in the group may have, and we're all here specifically to learn on how we can optimize this. Sound good? Cool. All right, so this one's going to be a shorter session. It's going to seem, again, a little bit more collegiate heavy, but if you have a question on something, let me know. So our agenda for this particular block of instruction is going to be to talk about bioenergetics, which are energy systems. We've talked about that a little bit before in the cardiovascular program design class. The size principle, which can come back to muscle fibers that we talked about in the resistance training program design class, and then some of the functions of skeletal muscle. And then all of these pertaining to the why of what we do. So let me ask this question very quick. And this is, again, for those individuals in the room and those on Teams. Why do you go and do an exercise such as a sprint? What is the point to you? If you're going to get on the track, you're going to go push yourself as hard as possible. Why do you do that?
To perform better.
Okay, so to perform better, how? In what way?
I think it's more like controlling. Well, I was sprint for controlling heart rate. So
okay.
Like basically how to bring my heart rate from being racing back down to racing to back down. Also, I guess it's mentally you'll think that you're getting faster and faster as much as you think that you're sprinting. So the more that you practice it, the faster you might think that you're getting.
Okay, so in the activity itself, your goal is to try and increase your heart rate as much as possible, you said, and get it to relax.
Yes.
And then your perception of trying to get faster within that actual activity. Okay, so why is that change of your heart rate, or how does that change of your heart rate correlate to you actually getting faster? What would be the difference between you doing a sprint on the track and then you getting your heart rate up in the gym, or just doing burpees in this room right now?
Better conditioning, so you can control that.
What do you mean by better conditioning, if you would want to expound upon that?
It's when you do that activity again, you don't feel that heart pounding so hard that you have to stop or something like that, that you can continue with activity.
Okay, so you're looking for getting better so that you don't feel it as difficult the next time, right? That's an interesting component. How about anyone that's in the room on Teams itself? Why do you go and do an activity such as a sprint, or even if it was high intensity interval training, right? HIIT training within the gym. What is the purpose to you?
Like, I mean, for the main purpose, I would think, or I would guess, like, hey, you're sprinting. I mean, I'll do it to like control breathing. It's more to slow the heart rate while I'm doing that activity. So it's more of I guess like a control, like you're controlling the actual breathing method. You're controlling the actual blood pumping through you. Like, so I guess you you're not exerting yourself as far as in you're doing more like as far as in like if I was benching, I would want to be able to do more reps or run farther or faster within that, that time period of where I usually, what would they say, like expand on my energy.
So that's actually a good correlation to make. Let's talk about resistance training in relation to this idea of sprinting, right? So we've mentioned sprinting to get the heart rate up and to relax it so that it won't be as hard when you do it again. Right. So when you go and you're performing resistance training exercises, and we've talked before about there's a difference with finding a weight you can move 5 times versus finding a weight that you could move 10 times, right? Your body takes in that imposed demand and makes a completely different adaptation, even if it is the exact same movement pattern. So what is your body using, or what do you think your body is using to make that determination of how it needs to adapt?
I think it would be like a muscle memory, or like, I mean, 'cause you mentioned it before, like as far as in injuries, like you're I guess not a nerve, but something tells you like, hey, this is how much, so it called you pain. So it like that's like your breaking point. But usually when you move past that point, your body just start to, I guess, adapt to whatever that weight is, whatever that pain may be. So I mean, I'm not sure what you called it, but
that's fine. We use a lot of terms. So what I'm trying to get at is your body always follows a singular principle when it comes to exercise that we have mentioned before, and that's the SAID principle. Okay. SAID principle stands for your specific adaptations to imposed demands. At the most rudimentary sense, it means whatever you do, your body is going to get better at. Okay. But specifically, so if you wanted to get better at strength, you needed to tell your body that muscular strength is
the most important.
Is important. Perfect. We have to prioritize that. And when it comes to strength, we have to utilize external resistance, that being resistance training, at an intensity for a body that is 85% of our 1 rep max or higher. And quantitatively, we've seen before, both in and out of the gym, for some of our sessions, that means 6 repetitions or less. So if you can do only 5 repetitions of that movement pattern, then you are telling your body it is important against gravity with this very specific posture that it needs to adapt to being able to produce more force. If you, however, can lower that intensity and then therefore do more volume, both sets and reps, then you're telling your body that it may be important to focus on the overall cross-sectional area of that muscle, which we have through adaptations of hypertrophy, right? Those are the aesthetic changes to our body composition. Once you get in excess of 15 repetitions, right? So you're getting in the intensity range of approximately 50% and lower. We're telling our body that it is important to focus on the stamina of the exercise itself and the recovery of the different pH changes in between, which leads to muscular endurance. Right. Now with cardiovascular activity, the key difference between cardiovascular activity and like resistance training activities and things of that nature are that you should not have a limiting factor within your musculoskeletal system. Meaning if you're going to go and do a long distance run, a foot march, swimming, cycling, hiking, and things of that nature, you should not feel that is one or more of your joints, your ligaments, your tendons, or any of your muscle groups that are fatiguing that prevent you from maintaining a certain intensity. Okay. If that's the case, it's usually an eye-opener that there's some type of limiting factor that you need to work on, whether it's stabilizing a certain joint or mobilizing a certain joint prior to that activity, or within the gym, right, to be able to strengthen some of those components.
So basically, you're
before
saying
you run, swim,
as far as in like a rock march, it basically my mindset like doing, because it's in a form of cardio.
Yes.
That I shouldn't have. My problem would be if I had say breathing or my heart is racing. This like that's a different type of actual cardio problem versus me feeling it in my shins or my ankles.
Absolutely. Okay. You want to, with every cardiovascular based activity, find a posture you can maintain at that pace, right? Whether it's per quarter mile on a run, per mile on a foot march, per 25 yards on a lap swim as an example. You want to find a pace that you can maintain for your overall duration, whether that's a very intense anaerobic based pace, right, where you're doing a work rest session, or a consistent pace, which would be an aerobic session, but where your muscles aren't limiting you. It should be difficult the entire time. You should be able to finish the entire time without rest.
Right.
And your muscles aren't the limiting factor. Right. You do want to feel it through your respiratory system, your nervous system, and your cardiovascular system, but not your musculoskeletal. And that's what sets it apart. Because if, let's say, you were going to do a foot march, you had your soldiers get together, whether it's your squad, your platoon, your company, etc., put 35 pounds on your back, and you tried to do a foot march around the perimeter here at Fort Buchanan. For all of the soldiers that felt that they're having some type of tension, say on the dorsal part of their foot, or on their tibia, right, the front lower part of their leg, in their quadriceps, their hip flexors, or in their trapezius from having that weight on their traps. If they felt that type of pain and discomfort and that limited their ability to maintain their speed, their body is going to intake the information that what they need to adapt to is focusing on that musculoskeletal component
And not necessarily.
the cardiovascular component of being able to maintain that posture throughout that activity. Right. So you'll greatly limit the thing that you're actually trying to get better at. Right. For cardiovascular activity, we look at bioenergetics, which are defined as our energy systems. So our energy systems are going to be the methods by which our body utilizes ATP. You remember us talking about ATP? It's been maybe 3 or 4 weeks since we've talked about it. Remember what that acronym stands for?
Is there a rope? It's fine.
So give it a shot, Sharon Cabrera?
Aerobic.
No.
No.
All right, it's not words we'll use colloquially, right, in normal conversation, but it is important. ATP is our body's energy currency. It stands for Adenosine Triphosphate. Tri meaning there's 3 phosphate molecules. So right now, you're sitting here, you're relaxing. I'm moving around a bit while I'm talking, and we're still utilizing ATP in order to survive. Right, our body has 11 systems, right? A cardiovascular system, digestive system, our integumentary system, which is our skin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In order for each of these systems to maintain their own health and their level of stability, their homeostasis, right, their balance, they use ATP, right? It takes one phosphate molecule from ATP turns to ADP, so from try to die, and that creates energy. And then it rephospholizes back to ATP using a specific energy system. Okay. At rest, we use something called beta oxidation, which uses fat. Fat is our primary source of fuel at rest. And although that seems, ideal, especially for individuals that want to lose a lot of weight, right, body composition wise, fat is a very, very, very slow burn, and it is extremely ineffective at creating enough ATP for actual energy needed for exercise. So if you would stand up and you just started jumping into the point where you're starting to get fatigued, as soon as your body needed a certain amount of energy to maintain that activity, you wouldn't be using fat anymore. Exactly. It's not a strong enough system or strong enough substance for your body to be able to use to create enough ATP to maintain the activity. So therefore, it'll shift into an entirely different one. Your body makes these determinations based off of your autonomic nervous system, ANS. Okay, so ANS is separate from your central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord. That involves everything that's voluntary. I can choose to talk with my hands. We physically interact with the world. That's all of our central nervous system, the feeling of something upon your skin and the changes of temperature. Your autonomic nervous system is everything you don't control, right? And it's
automatic.
Absolutely. This is everything else in your body, which luckily we don't have to control. I don't have to think about my heart trying to beat between 60 beats per minute, 100 beats per minute. I wouldn't have time to think about anything else. Neither would you, right? So same thing with digestive system. You don't want to have to think about breaking down every part of that food and pushing everywhere it needs to go. So the autonomic nervous system is a little bit of a slider between these two components you see on the screen, that being parasympathetic and sympathetic. And this, again, it seems like it's getting a little bit too much into the weeds of the science, but there's a very important understanding for this as a leader or as a trainer or as a coach, depending on what capacity you may be working at. Every single, or just as a human being, to be honest, Every single day you are either a little bit more parasympathetic or you're a little bit more sympathetic. Every single moment you can shift to one or the other. And the more you're in one rather than the other, there are pros and cons biologically. So parasympathetic, you may have otherwise been referred to, or excuse me, you otherwise normally refer to this as your rest and digest system, whereas sympathetic, you normally refer to it as your fight or flight. Right? Those are terms I'm sure you've heard before, correct?
Correct.
Good, good. So those terms cover the largest components of what our body is efficient at while those are more active. So if your autonomic nervous system's slider is more parasympathetic, your body is optimized for digesting food within your small intestine, pulling back water, pulling back nutrients from all the food that you're eating. It's much better at allowing you to down-regulate the amount of stimulus that's coming in, which is what allows you to sleep, as well as going through all 4 stages of sleep, which I know we haven't had a class specifically on sleep yet. That will be coming, but sleep is one of the most critical things that we can have. It's one of the only things we can't supplement. We can supplement different forms of exercise due to an injury or say due to lack of availability of equipment. We can supplement different forms of nutrients and intaking food, right, with various forms of dietary supplementation. You cannot supplement sleep, and you can't get it back either once lost. There's a lot of critical things that happen when you sleep. One, that's when you take all of your short-term memory and change it into long-term memory. That's when, especially as an athlete or someone that's trying to recover from an injury, or especially older individuals, that's when your body produces testosterone, when you're in stage 4 of sleep, deep sleep, which is the shortest amount of sleep you have throughout the night anyway. So you want to make sure you're getting as much into this position as possible, because that's going to allow you to get into more muscle repair and to everything else. And muscle repair, not just for exercise, but just the normal movement we have through the day, right? So for our spouses and our children and our family and our friends, just the normal movement we do creates damage, which causes inflammation, which is our primary healer for damage. If you remember, we talked about that in the injury class. And then your body's going to make all of the repair so that you don't hopefully feel that pain again through the stages of sleep. Okay. Now you want to be in this state throughout the majority of the day as well. Right? You want your heart rate low. You want your body to be able to optimally digest food, create the enzymes to digest that food, and to do whatever small repairs it can while you're actually awake. But what typically happens, especially in today's culture, with what we have, is we are a very sympathetically driven creature, especially us here now. And we're one of the only sympathetically driven animals on this planet. If you would like to still, whether you think of us as animals or not, right? That depends on your line of thinking. But every other creature on this planet that goes into a sympathetic state typically only does so when they are trying to get food or not be food. Right. And that's it. That may be a 3 to 5 minute period every other day or a few times a week. We get sympathetic when we're in the gym, right? Because we're increasing that heart rate. Our body doesn't know the difference with us jumping over a bench or getting a bar away from us, or us trying to run for our life. All it knows is the nervous system's being innervated and our heart rate's being increased. We get sympathetic when our alarm goes off in the morning, right? We give a high level of stress hormones that are released, in this case, cortisol and glucocorticoids. That's what allows us to pull ourselves out of that deep state of sleep, and our heart rate is immediately active. And there's another thing that happens immediately after that I'll get to in a moment. We get sympathetic when you have road rage. Right. That person cut you off. No one in this state knows how to drive. No one knows what they're doing. When we get to the office, so you see that person in the face. Do you see that person in the office that just had to bring that face to the office that day? You have no idea why they had to, but they chose to bring that face into work today, right? And then the stress of all the other things through your occupation, with your family, your spouse, etc. Every single time those things happen, you're becoming more sympathetic. Which, if the sympathetic nervous system isn't your rest and digest, that tells you the more sympathetic you are, the less efficient you are at even digesting the food that you're getting in. The less efficient you are at being able to produce testosterone and go through muscle repair. And we get in this cyclical aspect, we get in this cycle rather, where we prevent ourselves, even if we think we're doing everything right, because we're going to the gym, we're getting on the track, we're changing what we eat, but we get to the state where we're preventing ourselves from even getting the full optimal adaptations from that because of all the stressors that we have. And this is kind of along the lines of understanding the psychological component, why we have classes like MRT, right? The Master Resiliency Trainer course, and why that's mandatory training, why that's so important for our soldiers.
Right.
It's not just about creating optimism and hunt the good stuff, which are very essential.
It's technically a mental stage for your body and everything, your thoughts to process so your body can function correctly.
Exactly, starting that. It's perfect. So it's teaching our soldiers that they have so much more control over how they perceive the events around them than they may otherwise think. If an individual doesn't have those conversations and isn't educated in that way, they typically think they have to respond emotionally to a certain situation because that's the response that is specific. I have to get angry because you did this. Not thinking that they're choosing to get angry. That's a complete choice of how they want to interpret and perceive that information. So we can actually save those soldiers' lives to a large extent because our occupation doesn't allow us to just get into a mental state of focus, visualize a specific exercise, go do that exercise and back off. We have to be able to react in a physical environment where we may be a liability to other people and they may be a liability to us. Critical thinking in a non-comfortable environment, non-comfortable temperatures, life or death situation away from our family and friends where we may not know if and when we are coming back.
Right.
So if every single athlete out there, tactical athletes have the most important priority of getting control of their own psychology, right? Getting control of their own mind and resiliency, okay? So some positive natures of the fight or flight, though. I don't want to make it seem like it's all negative, right? Because we do go to the gym, we do work out and things like that. So when you are very sympathetic, it increases your overall alertness, right? Because if you want to not be food or you want to get food, you need to be able to track all of these different things through our primary senses. It increases our heart rate. This is what allows our body to get oxygen to our muscles to take out the different forms of acid that our muscles produce when they contract, and then to put oxygen back into it so we can keep running and we can keep catching, keep pushing, keep pulling. It also increases our blood pressure, right, which is in a very positive sense, right, not in the hypertensive sense. It helps our body control the change of our diameter of our blood vessels to allow at rest our blood pressure to be in a better sense. It's one of the reasons why people that exercise a lot typically have a lower blood pressure.
So would
Yeah.
you, in the case of a sympathetic nervous system, as far as in fight and flight, would that affect your, I will sit here and say, in a case of immune system? Like some people.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect. So your lymphatic system, your immune system, is at its best when you're sympathetic, right? And you see these things on two cases. One, think of the last time you or someone you knew was sick. What are some symptoms they have when they're sick, and they're especially when their body's trying to fight off and recover from the illness? A fever, good, that's huge. What's happening when they have a fever?
Like sweating, usually go from chill to cold, runny nose. I mean, just a reaction. More cough is, but mucus come up.
Perfect. So all of these things are your immune system in a hyperactive state, right? Different forms of mucus and different forms of any of those are your immune system fighting.
The rejection of it.
Yes, your heart rate increasing, your body temperature increasing to try and kill off anything that's in there and fight. All of that is sympathetically driven, similar to if you go and you exercise. When you go and you exercise, you increase the pliability of your muscles and your joints. You're increasing your body temperature, your heart rate, everything. If you were trying to run from something that was trying to eat you, or you were trying to catch food, the last thing you need to worry about is something external getting into your internal system. All right, our integumentary system, our skin is our largest protection system. So if it is violated, or whether if something cuts our skin and it opens up that protection system, our immune system is immediate, on point, able to react. So this is another reason why, and there's countless studies showing this, people that exercise regularly are less likely to even get the common cold or illnesses. In fact, there's quite a few epigenetic studies showing that people that have a high state of physical health through exercise are much more resilient against even things like cancer, diabetes, And even if they're genetically disposed, right? Everyone in their family has had diabetes or had this form of cancer. Their chances of getting it are so much lower because their body is so much more efficient at being able to respond to each of these things. So the sympathetic nervous system is good. We just don't want to stay in it.
Right.
The idea is you want to have a really good, really intense training session to whatever intensity that you're trying to specifically hit, and then back off as much as possible for the rest of the day. That is the most ideal thing you can do. Any initial questions on the ANS? Hopefully that helped it up a little bit. Okay. So that ties into the, well, excuse me, this slide is additional supplementary for some of the conversations that we had, right? So stress is just something that is externally that's applying us. We can use stress positively or negatively. Right, performance stress, so especially if you've ever competed or we've been in theater, it's a very, very, very good actual modifier to our system, as we just talked about.
Go high.
Yeah, exactly. Adrenal stress is one of those, right? When we think of adrenaline, epinephrine. Anxiety is the negative form of stress. Anxiety is when we take an external application of stress and then we change it within our perception, and we make our body produce a lot of these stress hormones to react to it negatively due to our style of thinking.
Cortisol.
Yes, exactly. There's a whole huge slew of different stress hormones. Supplementation can affect this as well. Whether people are taking pre-workout regularly, thermogenics, right? People are taking something like a fat burner, which are not effective, as we talked about before. And then caffeine, which is the most used supplement in the world. A lot of people take caffeine because they think it will wake them up or provides energy. But we've talked about this before in nutrition. What is energy to the body?
Carbs.
Not carbs, but they all make this. So carbs, fat, and protein all count as what?
Calories.
Calories. Calories are energy of the body. There's 0 calories in caffeine. It cannot provide you energy. But what it does is it's a central nervous system stimulant. And if you remember before, I talked about ATP.
Right.
You remember what that A stands for?
That word that I can't pronounce.
So it stands for adenosine. So you have adenosine receptors within your brain, and caffeine has a chemical structure so similar to adenosine that when you have caffeine in your system, it attaches to those receptors and it prevents adenosine from connecting, at least for about 8 to 10 hours. So when that happens, you feel more alert because adenosine's purpose, when your body's breaking off ATP and ADP and AMP, as it's breaking those in for you to have energy, the adenosine builds up throughout the day. Adenosine allows you to feel fatigued and allows you to sleep. So when you have caffeine, what it does is it prevents adenosine from connecting, so you feel more alert. And then 8 to 10 hours later, when you would normally either be sleeping, if you took caffeine in the morning, you start to feel a huge thing of lethargy, a huge hit of lethargy, and you feel tired, maybe even some stress,
and they say
some cranial headaches and things of that nature.
The caffeine usually it triggers to a crash.
It does.
Meaning like, hey, you get that whatever you call a boost of energy, which is not a boost of energy.
It's a perception difference. Yes.
Once it finally connects, is your body is. I usually call it like an overthrow, like, hey, it's overpowering because you need to rest. So
yes, and that is actually a withdrawal effect.
Right.
Caffeine's withdrawal effect hits in approximately 10 hours due to its half-life. Sometimes it hits while you are asleep, which is why some people don't feel the withdrawal effect to the morning, in which they feel they don't want to communicate with other people, right? They feel like they have a headache, all of these other things, because your hormones will change your perception of the world and how you interact by a huge, huge margin. And I'm not trying to say this to say that caffeine is bad for you, though. Caffeine is one of the strongest ergogenic aids that we have. An ergogenic aid is a dietary supplement that has been shown to increase either physical or mental performance. So caffeine does increase mental acuity, right? So your overall ability to parse different pieces of information, and it helps for aerobic respiration quite a bit, by a huge portion actually. Even more so actually if you abstain though. If you abstain from caffeine except for taking it about 60 to 90 minutes prior to aerobic activity, it'll have an even stronger overall effect. Okay. But caffeine, as you've seen, just like you see in fat burners and things like that, it increases your heart rate too. And it keeps it elevated for an extended period of the day, meaning you'll never get completely down to resting, meaning that you won't be as parasympathetic as you can. Okay. Questions on that? All right, so this is just kind of showing you the ATP to ADP for those of you that are visual learners as we go through, right? The adenosine triphosphate turning into adenosine diphosphate, and that produces energy. And then our body takes phosphate molecules and actually adds it back too. Now, it does this at different rates and at different capacities, depending on how much energy that we require in the exact moment. So with that, these are your primary energy systems. You have ATP, PC, which stands for your adenosine triphosphate phosphocreatine system. Sometimes it's just called PCR for phosphocreatine. You have anaerobic glycolysis and aerobic glycolysis, which falls under aerobic respiration. We're not going to get deep into Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, and things like that. If you are curious, though, for your continuing education, for those of you that are CTAS, for any type of certification, those are the other conversations we can kind of have on the side. And then beta oxidation is what we're all using right now, right? That's what we basically use at rest. So say you were going to go and sprint, like we were talking about earlier. For you to be able to get to that highest intensity for you, right? Because everyone's going to be able to sprint at a different speed. When you sprint at your max intensity, your body sees that the requirement to do what you are telling it to do means that it needs enough energy that it has to use the PCR system.
So it pulls your creatine.
Yes, it pulls creatine from the muscle, and it uses that to create ATP at a very, very, very fast rate, but it can only do so for a very short duration. In fact, your ATP PC system can only last about 6 seconds for most people, and potentially up to 10 seconds if they regularly supplement creatine. And 4 seconds may not seem like a much, but 4 seconds of the same amount of energy production in that system is huge. That changes the game, which is why when we talked about nutrition, we talked about how important creatine is for athletes, right? To be able to maintain. Because the only way to get creatine in through food is to eat approximately a pound of beef per day to make it equivalent to you having 5 grams of a water-soluble, tasteless thing that you could buy a year's supply for like $11.
Which is, yeah, exactly.
Right. So
which is dangerous for the simple fact is that, yeah, you're getting the creatine supplement, but also, what do you call it? What is it? Clogging the artery.
For that you're talking about if you try to get it through meat? Yes, absolutely. And we have over 70 years of studies showing that there's no negative effect for long-term creatine use and a huge form of populations, right? So it is a very positive, one of the few actually good supplements to take. But knowing that, if you think of like us doing a warrior task, right? Our soldiers are going to go and they're going to try and move under direct fire, right? Our 3 methods of moving under direct fire are what?
Low
crawl, high crawl,
and 3 to 5 second rush.
Good, 3 to 5 second rushes. When you do that 3 to 5 second rush, especially your life's in danger, this is a system that you need. When you are doing urban operations, you get into a room to clear a room, you don't want to take longer than 5 seconds to get into the position that you need. You are going to be in a very bad position.
Right.
Where you're trying to help a fellow soldier over a wall, or you're trying to get in and out of a vehicle, you're trying to respond to a specific activity that happened. This is the energy system that you need. But if you don't normally train it, your body will not be efficient at using it. So if you have soldiers that never get into this system, the maximum they can stay in the system may be 2 seconds. Because your body has no idea how to use it effectively.
This is pulling, like basically you use this in a sense of burst of energy.
Yes,
okay.
There is no stronger amount of energy you can have than from the system. So that means that we need to prioritize our soldiers increasing their capacity within the system. And this takes back to, again, the importance of the understanding of exercise physiology as a leader. If I want to get my soldiers better at this, that means I have to tell my body and they have to tell their bodies that this is what they need to improve. If I give them a training session in which they're going and they're sprinting for 20, 30 seconds, their body is not going to get better at PCR. If I give them a training session in which they do a few sprints, but they're also doing long runs, their body will not prioritize PCR. Absolutely. You need to give your body the specific information that this is what I need to get better at. Meaning that regardless of the mode of exercise you're choosing, because that could be swimming, that could be running, that could be cycling, etc., you need to program in a way where the intensity of the activity doesn't last longer than 6 seconds, and that you rest enough to allow this energy system to be readily available again. This energy system specifically has a 1 to 12 to 1 to 20 work to rest ratio. So the more trained you are, the less rest you'll need. You'll be closer to the 1 to 12. The less trained you or your soldiers are, the more rest they need. They'll be closer to 1 to 20.
So after those 6 seconds, how really you have to rest until you do it again?
Yes. So say you ran for 5 seconds and it's maximum intensity. You blew a whistle with your squad and they ran as hard as they possibly could. Something was coming after them. They couldn't move any faster. 5 seconds. They hadn't done this before. This is a new session for them. So the training age would be considered therefore low. You would do a 1 to 20 work to rest ratio, meaning you would rest 100 seconds before you would have them do a follow-on set. And as you progress through this, you would change eventually from a 1 to 20 to 1 to 19 to 1 to 18, etc., until you can eventually get them to a 1 to 12. And then you would still need to maintain that system. But if you don't do a session like that, you never prioritize the system. So you never teach your body how to get better at it. Any questions on that? Good. All of your other systems are the exact same way. The difference is the body uses it again. The body determines rather which energy system to use based on the intensity, and it can only recover that if there's appropriate rest. So one of the key differences that between something that makes an exercise anaerobic versus aerobic is the intensity that drives the duration. PCR is anaerobic because it lasts up to that about 6 seconds. Anaerobic glycolysis, as the name implies, is also anaerobic because it lasts up to approximately 2 minutes for most people. If you are conducting an exercise that you can maintain longer than 2 minutes, your body will not use your anaerobic energy systems in order to accomplish that task. So it doesn't matter that you do something for 30 seconds or 45 seconds. If the intensity isn't so high that you couldn't maintain it for that duration.
Don't even use the
yes.
What you think is supposed to be used.
Perfect. The demand isn't there to force the body to use that energy system for ATP production. Now, the anaerobic piece tells you that it's also called fast glycolysis or alactic systems when you look at different forms of literature. Anaerobic glycolysis, and by name tells you it uses what for an energy source?
Glycolysis.
Glycolysis, which means the destruction or utilization of what? What does the GLY mean, that prefix? What type of fuel source is that?
Glucose.
Yes, but where does that come from specifically in food?
Carbs.
Carbs, perfect. Sugar. Like means sugar. So when we consume carbohydrates, our body stores carbohydrates in the muscle, which is glycogen, or in the blood, which is glucose. That's what our body pulls. It's the only thing our body can pull for most forms of exercise. So if you're performing an exercise such as in the gym, most activities in the gym for the work period is anaerobic, or they are anaerobic because they won't last longer than that 2 minutes without some form of a rest. Mm-hmm. And then same thing with any type of maybe longer sprint. So you're doing a 100-meter sprint, right? Or 400-meter sprint for repeats. You'll be using your anaerobic glycolysis system. This has a work to rest ratio of 1 to 3 to 1 to 5. So if you're going to be wanting to repeat, do multiple sets, it would be a 1 to 3 to 1 to 5 of whatever your work period was. Right? Any questions on this piece?
So 1 to 3 is one repetition, 3 minutes, then rest.
Not necessarily 3 minutes, but 3 times whatever your work was, or up to 5 times whatever your work was. So example, you sprint for 30 seconds, right? Are you still using PCR in 30 seconds?
No.
No, because it had a maximum of
6 seconds.
6 seconds. So your body will move into anaerobic glycolysis in order to accommodate for the intensity of the activity. And then if it was 30 seconds long,
90 seconds then.
It would be 90 seconds at a 1 to 3 or be 150 seconds at 1 to 5 before you'd go again. Perfect. Then the next energy system your body uses is aerobic respiration, typically under aerobic glycolysis. Again, that's where you see that sugar word. This is anything you can do up to about 3 hours of maintained activity. So even up to doing marathons, your body is still going to use carbohydrates. Right? If your body needs energy in order to produce force, whatever activity it is, it's going to be using carbs. And this is why when we taught nutrition the last few times, when we had a discussion in nutrition, we covered that our bodies are carb burning machines.
So our intake should be, I mean, the usually your intake should sort of align on, I guess, how much carbs that you decide to burn. So you replenish that with the carbs that you intake?
Yes, in a way, but it's very difficult to know how many calories you actually consumed or utilized rather than consumed, how many calories you utilized during some type of physical exertion and where those calories came from. Because they're likely not coming from, or almost guaranteed, they're not coming from the food you just ate. Right? They're coming from your energy stores. So say you eat an apple, right? An apple's form of sugar is fructose. Right? Fructose is a disaccharide, so it means it's 2 sugar chain. And you start any type of carb that's a 1 or 2 sugar chain starts to break down in your mouth because your saliva is an enzyme called amylase. So it starts putting it into your bloodstream immediately. All right, it's one of the reasons for your that's one of the jobs of your pancreas rather is to either take sugar and energy out of the bloodstream, which is insulin, or you have glucagon, which puts energy into the bloodstream. Good. So it stores energy there as glucose, and then it'll store it in the muscle as glycogen. Your blood glucose is one of the first things your body's going to use in exercise, can last anywhere up to about 45 minutes, depending on the intensity of the activity. But your muscle glycogen, which will shift to, can last those other few hours. This is also why in long activities such as half marathons, triathlons, and things like that, you see glucose gels. You see them consume those packets throughout, or stands with fruit along with electrolytes to be able to help for the signaling of the nerves, which are what electrolytes help with for the contraction of the muscles. You replenish your blood glucose because you're depleting it and depleting it and depleting it throughout that actual activity. Okay. So this does produce a lot of ATP, but it produces it again slowly. So your body will make the determination of using this depending on the intensity of the activity. And that kind of pulls together the entire understanding for the priority of cardiovascular exercise. Right? So if you were going to choose whether you're going to run a mile today, 2 miles today, you're going to run for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you're going to run 200s or 300s, instead of just determining the distance and the duration based off of some arbitrary means, we need to look at our individual or our soldier's individual or the unit's goal. All right. So when you perform that initial needs analysis we talked about in program design, if that unit needs to do patrols, right, they need to do a lot of long distance foot marches, what energy system is going to be of paramount importance for them to train?
More toward their cardiovascular, like as far as you said longer?
Yeah, longer duration. They'll be doing a lot of patrols. Which of the 3 primary energy systems that we talked about would be the primary one for them to train?
I would think it would be more like I guess what is it called? It would be like the rest. There we go. Would it be aerobic?
It would be aerobic respiration.
Because it's longer than
it'll be a long duration. Right. So in this, we need to make sure that we are not introducing intensity that pulls them out of aerobic respiration, that the mode of the training, say if it was a foot march, is consistent, and we do progressive overload, starting them at either a low duration and increasing the duration while reducing the intensity, or vice versa. We could start at a high duration, low intensity, and those will always be inverted. Okay. As you go week to week to week to week in any program, if your duration increases, you always want your intensity to decrease and vice versa. With resistance training, our duration is our volume, right? Our sets and our repetitions. But whenever intensity increases, duration decreases. So you can start either way, depending on what your goal is. But you need to progressively move through that, always targeting the right energy system in order to make sure that you're getting the most out of the actual session that you're conducting. Now, with the gym, though, with muscular actual contractions, that's what ties us into conversation we had before, which are muscle fiber types. And the new FM7-22 actually gets into all of these energy systems. It gets into these muscle fiber types to talk about the importance of it. So it's not just collegiate material and POI information, so program of instruction information for master fitness trainers and the like. This is expected for all of your soldiers to generally understand. It's in doctrine for soldiers to understand. Now, when we're doing, I told you earlier, when you're doing aerobic or cardiovascular activity, we don't want what to be our limiting factor.
Muscle strength.
Muscles, not necessarily just strength, but muscles. In the gym, it's the exact opposite. That's what we want to be the limiting factor because that's what we're telling our body to get better at. So the intensities we measure in the gym for our musculoskeletal system come back to muscle fiber types. So we have our slow twitch, which are very small muscles that can go for a long time that we use whenever we use muscle endurance. Then we have our fast twitch, which are those that we affect with strength, power, or hypertrophy primarily.
Medium 1-2 repetitions.
Exactly. Anything that's really an intensity that is 14 reps or less is going to start targeting those fast twitch muscle fibers to an extent. And this is why. And I'll try and be brief with the explanation of this. So what you see here on this graph, you see smaller circles to the left that are green, and then you see the yellow circles, right? And it's labeled as type 1 and type 2. This is called the size principle. So what I'd like you to think about with this as a graph is think about GPS, right? If you look at this whole graph here for your body, say you wanted to work out at approximately 80% intensity, or you needed to move something 8 times. To your body, that means there's a certain threshold, which we calculate as 80%, which is a fast twitch muscle fiber that you need to produce the force to move that item, right? 80%, just look from the bottom left, moving to the top right. If you would color in 80% of this whole square to be able to hit the specific muscle fiber and group that you want, say it was over here, you would need to get into the gym and do that activity to teach the body how to innervate those muscle groups. But let's say you've never done it before, right? You've never been to that area before, back to the GPS analogy. When you first try and move that bar, your body's going to send an electrical and chemical signal, and it will be erratic. It will bounce back and forth, back and forth, back and forth till it finds what it needs. And it may do that in a fraction of a second. That's what allows that joint to move once you've sent that signal, that muscle action potential. And the joint moves and you move that weight, okay? If you were driving a city trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B and you had no idea how to get there, you didn't have GPS yet, you may make a lot of turns before you get there. But you're driving on that road for a while. You've lived in that area for a while, you start to learn the shortcuts. That's the same thing when you're going to the gym consistently. What the body learns, instead of making this erratic back and forth style, once it sends that electrical and chemical signal, it can make a beeline, a straight line to what it needs. That's what's happening when your body's actually getting stronger or you're getting better at the activity. You can do more repetitions because to the body, even if the difference between 80 and 82% are drastically different for the same exercise. So when our soldiers go into the gym, we give them opportunity to train in the gym and they're going and they're just lifting arbitrary weights. They're lifting until they're tired or they're focusing on their muscles rather than in movement patterns. They could be giving their body very suboptimal information, if nothing to adapt. It's not important just that they're moving. For just livelihood and health, sure, absolutely. But we want them to get better at something. We have such a small amount of time for them to train that we need to ensure that they're practicing movement patterns that are specific to their occupation, right? Specific to their demands, and that we're programming the intensity, or we teach them how to program the intensity so that they are teaching their body exactly what they need to do to get better. This is why when we say 6 reps or less equates to strength, because to your body, that 85% marker, these type 2 fibers that you need to produce the amount of force for strength, are never targeted if the intensity isn't there, similar to the PCR and the anaerobic system. So even if you lifted 5 pounds 8 times, or excuse me, 5 pounds 5 times, if you can move 5 pounds 30 times, that's not 85% to your body. right? You need to find the
Probably
percentage to your body,
Probably the 20% that they already
Yeah.
muscle
They're
memory.
already right? It's also rather, let me come back for a second. So it's also one of the reasons that the specific warm-up is so important because it potentiates the pattern, it primes the pattern. It kind of innervates or turns on the nerves and the muscle fibers in that specific area that you're trying to get at. So when you get to the exercise, it actually increases your capabilities. This is one of the reasons why in the APFT, it was mandatory to do preparation drill prior to, even though most units didn't do it.
Right.
And in the ACFT,
They used to
we do
blame
as
it
well.
on and say, oh, it's going to make them tired, but it's actually preparation for the
It
actual.
makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Exactly. It makes a huge difference. The lack of doing that warm-up will decrease that soldier's performance bar none. Bar none, right? So we need to make sure we are always warming up effectively. Okay. Now, I'm only gonna cover this because it's important for the strength and understanding component as well. These are your two primary proprioceptors, right? So for proprioceptors, this is, well, let me ask this question. Do you know what proprioception means?
No.
So proprioception is our awareness of our body in space.
Okay.
This is how we interact with the outside world. If you're going to reach for a glass in order to drink water and get it specifically so you don't spill water anywhere else, right? It just goes straight in your mouth. You are constantly sending and receiving signals of tension and length changes to your muscles and tendons everywhere. This is how we interact. With exercise, this is important because you have two primary ones that you see on screen, the muscle spindle, which constantly sends signals to our brain about the length changes, if something is short or long. And you have your GTO, your Golgi tendon organ, which sits within your tendons, and it tells your body how much force is being produced through that tendon. Your GTO acts as a natural governor in your body. So if you or your soldier or someone that you know are even trying to get into resistance training and they try to go lift heavy weights, they cannot get to their functional form of strength for about 6 weeks of consistency because every single time they're getting enough tension on that tendon, the GTO inhibits that contraction. It actually prevents how much force they can produce as a safety mechanism because their body's not used to it. For the first 6 to 10 weeks of resistance training, what you're doing is you're teaching your body with that external resistance to stop limiting your force production so that your GTO stops inhibiting that action so you can actually move more weight. And then after about 6 to 10 weeks of consistency, then it starts to become a nervous system change, which is why when you do true strength training, your muscles don't even get tired. You just feel tired to your soul, right? In between those sets, you need to take a break. And up until that point, it's all just teaching the body not to hold yourself back.
Right.
And for injuries, this is very specific because if you've ever experienced or seen someone run on a track, say they're doing sprints, and they feel that they quote unquote pull a muscle, right? Pulling a muscle isn't something that can technically happen, right? But your tendons connect your muscles to your bones. So the force has to come through that tendon. If the body's not used to being in those positions at high levels of intensity, then what happens is the muscle spindle causes a shortening action, similar to the GTO causing an inhibitory response. It shortens that muscle in order to save that muscle and tendon. And that's where we see a Charlie horse or a cramp or that type of pull, and we feel that tightness, we can't do anything. And that happens again due to the body trying to protect itself from not normally experiencing intensity at that angle or intensity in general. This is also why it's so important that way before we go to theater, way before we get into these operations, we get to the highest level of intensity possible for our soldiers. Otherwise, when they're there, if we try and be too safe, once we get there, they're at a greater risk of injury. Right. It's also why exercise is such an injury prevention mechanic. Okay. With that, it comes to another, we've already talked about this in 2 blocks of instruction before, but for those that haven't seen this before, our musculoskeletal system is broken down into agonists, antagonists, and synergists, right? This is typically if you see someone that's going to go and do a quote unquote chest day, your primary mover, which is your agonist, would be chest in an exercise such as bench press, chest press, a fly, things like that. With running, your primary agonist from the running class is your hamstring. Your hamstring is one of your primary movers to allow you to, have that horizontal change of positioning while you're going forward. Your antagonists oppose the primary maneuver, but in a good way. And an understanding of this is also critical. Consider you flexing your elbow, right? You bending your elbow. When you do so, what muscle group shortens?
Your
Bicep.
Your bicep group, right? The two heads of your bicep shorten in order for your forearm to come closer to your humerus. But simultaneously, one of your muscle groups has to lengthen. What do you think that is?
your tricep.
Your tricep group. So all three heads of your tricep. In order for your elbow joint to move, your tricep has to coordinate with your bicep for that joint action. So when we have soldiers or even ourselves, when we constantly train a joint in the same plane of motion or on one side, and we don't touch the other side of whatever that is, whatever opposes that joint, that can typically hold us back or increase our risk of injury. So if you see individuals that their horizontal pressing, such as a bench press, is significantly stronger than their horizontal pull, such as a bent over row, they are at a very high risk of injury, even if they exercise normally. And the lack of that horizontal pull for a bent over row could be preventing them from increasing their bench press.
So your antagonist and your, what's it, agonist?
Agonist and antagonist.
It's best that is like, you gotta be, you're saying more evenly balanced?
Yes, as much as possible, you want to evenly balance them for both performance and injury reduction.
It has to be on the same section, or you have.
Good question, good question. This can be done in the same session. Or if you do it in the same session with static sets, which is an example, think of doing an overhead press or a strict military press, which would be a vertical push. You could do 3 sets of that, and then you could do 3 sets of pull-ups, which would be a vertical pull. Right, that'll be a static set in the same session of a push-pull type variation. You could do it in the same set, in a dynamic set, which you would do a overhead press and then a pull-up before you rest. That would be considered a superset.
Right.
Or you could train where you say you did upper body, or you did, excuse me, some type of upper body push on, say, Monday, and upper body pull Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever day of the week
I
to be able to
usually
pose
do
it.
bis and tries, but I'll do chest one day, but do back the next day. I think that
What is your
it
best,
usually hurt.
what is your best advice?
So, look, a lot of your soldiers can come to you and ask something like this when you start teaching these classes. What exercise do I need to do, and what is the best thing to do? The difficulty of that is,
I don't know what's best for you.
well, it's not that, you know, there's a lot of variables that go into this, right? Where are they currently in their capabilities? That. But Sarlatni actually brought up a good point. He does say chest one day, then back the other day because it feels sore and it hurts. You have something called reciprocal inhibition, right? Which is what I described when I talked about the bicep shortening when the tricep lengthens. That's actually what we do when we stretch, right? When we're stretching, we're causing one muscle to concentrically contract, right? Which is to shorten, and the other muscle to eccentrically contract, which is to lengthen. Even when it's lengthening, it is contracting, and that lengthening, or excuse me, the shortening of one causes the lengthening of the other. So when you do chest after you've done, say, some form of back, that actually helps you recover quicker because the contraction of the antagonist forces a relaxation of the agonist. Right, that works in conjunction with one another. And then our synergists are very important as well, right? Our synergists are the muscles that we typically don't focus on unless you have a really good coach or you've been an athlete for a long time. Our synergists are, say, like our TFL, our tensor fasciae latae, which sits on your hip. That is the muscle that turns into our iliotibial band or IT band and prevents knee pain or can cause knee pain when running. Right, so when we run, it's all sagittal, straight forward and backward. Because of that, we need to be able to manage our lateral stability in the frontal plane. If you never work your lateral synergists, then you will have instability in that frontal plane as you try to move forward and backward. So in order to prevent that, we need to make sure we're doing stuff like hip stability drill, where we're doing the lateral leg raise, the medial leg raise. We're working through abduction, which is taking taking a limb away, or adduction, which is taking a limb toward the center. And we're training those synergists so that they don't exhaust quickly and further affect our performance or injury risk on another exercise. And the last form of contraction that we have is isometric. Isometric contraction means that you're contracting a muscle, but nothing is shortening or lengthening. Right? So like if you put your hands together, both biceps are flexed, and with one hand you're trying to push down, the other hand you're trying to push up, and nothing's moving, but you're contracting, that's isometric. Isometric are actually used a lot in rehabilitation because they're the only form of muscular contraction that doesn't have an inflammatory response. So they're really, really good. They're very, very useful, especially if your equipment limited, because your limitation is just the amount of force you can produce. A lot of partner-based training programs that they do for calisthenics utilize isometric training. And another very interesting piece of isometric training is this. If you put your elbow at 45 degrees and you isometrically contract your bicep of that arm, trying to pull that hand in, but push against, your body can increase its capabilities of that contraction, but only at and around 45 degrees. It won't make you any better if you're, say, at 60 degrees or at 90 degrees for that elbow flexion.
To be in that
it's only within that short range because your body is very, very, very specific to the information that it receives. Okay. All right, good. So in this overall lesson plan, I know this is shorter than some of our other lesson plans, but overall in this lesson plan, we covered bioenergetics, right, being our energy systems, and the importance of understanding those so we can properly program for our soldiers and teach them how to program. We covered the size principle, which covers the muscular component, right, of how our body's adapting, or why our body's adapting. We also covered the autonomic nervous system, right? So slightly introducing what we're going to talk about more in our resiliency class about how much our perception of the world affects our health and our ability to react and interact. We introduced a little aspect of sleep, which we'll talk about as well in the next sleep class that we have. And then we got into the different forms of both muscular contractions and then the types of muscles used for those muscular contractions. Okay. To repeat something I said in the beginning, when we get into anatomy and physiology and we haven't had an anatomy class yet, these seem to many of our soldiers that it kind of gets a little bit in the weeds, a little bit deep into the science, things they don't normally think about. But it's very important. There's a reason it was added to doctrine. There's a reason why a lot of the different forms of both nutrition and exercise documents that we have in the Army now are trying to change the language in this manner, because our soldiers and ourselves are never taught anything about our body or anything about, really optimal health as an athlete within general education, which means that unless their parent is for some reason an exercise science major, or they choose to get into that type of education, then they may never know. And I've had soldiers that are, and clients in general, that have ranged from 9 years old to 90. And it's very sad when you see an individual that has been alive for 9 decades and they've been eating every single day, they've been moving every single day, but they don't know how either of those affect their health. We can give our soldiers a lot more power and control over their ability to recover from these injuries, or for them to be able to increase their body or change their body composition or increase their performance, but they can't do so if they're ignorant of how to do it. Right, so the education piece is important. Do I have any questions on any of the material that we've gone over today for exercise physiology?
Good.
Awesome. Good. Awesome. Excellent. Okay, well, I thank you very much for this time again. Remember, we have these clinics every Tuesday and Thursday in room 113 here at building 315 for the 393rd at 9 a.m. Most of them are between 9 and 10, some of them to 9:11. We went a few minutes over 10 today, and I know we have a lot of things to do. So again, I appreciate your time, and that'll conclude this session.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Cool.